What's going on YouTube? 0088 here. So I just saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and I have to say it's mostly a return to form for the MCU. This movie felt like it was ripped right out of the MCU Phase 3 or Phase 2, and I think that comes down to James Gunn clearly being passionate about the world, the story and the characters he's been writing about. This doesn't feel like a movie that was micromanaged, checking boxes or trying to pander to certain political trends like most of how Phase 4 felt. This was much closer to a No Way Home than a She-Hulk, let's put it that way. But was it as good as Spider-Man No Way Home? Let's get into it. Let's talk about things I weren't so fond of and then finish up on the positive, talking about the stuff I loved. First, I've got to talk about one of mine and a lot of people's most anticipated character we've been waiting for since we first laid eyes on that false cocoon in the after credits of Thor the Dark World. Adam Warlock. Bro, this brother, I've been wanting to see this guy for so long. I had to make my own fan fiction depicting him in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. What would have happened if Adam Warlock was in those movies like James Gunn said he was supposed to be in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2? What would he have done? What would he have been like if he was involved in a battle against Thanos, who is his arch nemesis from the comics? Please check that out after this video, or even right now if you're really curious about it, and then come back to this video. But yeah, now you're going to see why I made this fan fiction once I talk about how Adam Warlock was depicted in this movie. He's one of my favorite characters. What he does in the Infinity storyline was epic in the comics. I wish they did it in the movies, and I was looking forward to him in this movie, but I was disappointed with what James Gunn did with him, and we're going to get into that right now. I wanted to see this brother step foot in the MCU since I first read the Infinity Gauntlet comic about 8 years ago now. So did James Gunn do him justice? Was leaving him out of the Avengers Infinity Saga, his most important arcs, just so Gunn could introduce him later and then strip him away from his all-important Batman Joker-esque rivalry with Thanos, worth it? Sorry to say, it wasn't. Not only did Gunn reduce the ethereal, almost godlike, intelligent, cosmic, formidable leader from the comics into a bumbling idiot, also he didn't even seem prominent enough to feel like he truly deserved his slot as a Guardian by the end of the movie. And yet, out of all the new characters that do become Guardians that we've met in this movie, he is the most we get any character development from, which wasn't much, and is a problem in and of itself that I'll get to later on. While I love Will Poulter as an actor, I'm not sure his portrayal of Warlock felt true to how he's depicted in the comics. When I first heard of his casting, I felt it was miscast, and after watching the film, that feeling hasn't changed. Don't get me wrong, when he's playing bumbling idiot Drax the Destroyer Light, then he does a great job with what he's given. But if he ever becomes more than that, and becomes a more prominent figure in the MCU, and more of what he actually is in the source material, then Poulter wasn't given a proper chance to see if he can play the hyper-intelligent, regal, godlike, cosmic being Warlock is in the comics, because instead of that, we got Drax the bumbling idiot Destroyer Light. Now at this point, we know the MCU, especially Gunn, likes to portray characters very differently to their comic personas, which he gets away with because he uses obscure characters that aren't really known to the general audience and to even a lot of comic fans. But considering Warlock's later importance and significance to the overall Marvel universe, I felt it was necessary that this movie portray his character more accurately, especially after he was omitted from the Infinity Saga, where no doubt more fans would have read up on him after learning about Thanos, who is Warlock's eternal rival. Warlock in the comics felt like a leader, or someone who could be an eventual leader when he was first introduced. I mean, this is a man who later replaces the literal second in command of the Marvel Universe's version of God. He is literally Space Jesus in the comics, who instead in this movie is either stuck arguing with his so-called mother Aisha, who's his sister in the comics, about not being able to do what he wants or what he likes, or he's thinking about how cute his new weird pet is. Now, you may argue Adam has been alive for maybe a week or so he doesn't understand the world and he is very much like a baby. But just because he's newly born doesn't mean he needs to be a bumbling fool like most of Gunn's alien characters. You know who else was alive for all of one day, yet isn't portrayed like a moron? The Vision, who's actually very similar to Adam Warlock in terms of story and design. When Vision was introduced, he felt like a superior ultimate being that isn't to be fucked with by the end of Age of Ultron. And that presence wasn't only felt in his physicality, but also in his personality and his decorum. He got probably one of the most poignant lines in the MCU, said in shitty Phase 4 of all places.
I've never experienced loss because I've never had a loved one to lose. But what is grief? If not love, persevering.
Vision was first born in Avengers Age of Ultron, and by the end of that same movie, he was having philosophical discussions with Ultron about the human condition.
Well, I was born yesterday.
In Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, by the end of the movie, Adam Warlock is still trying to figure out how to hug people. And you might say, well, that's how he was in the comics when he was first born. James was just expanding on that idea. Well, let's test that theory. In the comics, Adam was born under the name Him by the Enclave on Earth, who were up to no good. As soon as Warlock gained consciousness, he immediately understood his creators were nasty and dangerous, and he made quick work of them. He immediately understood that they were going to use him for evil. And then he went on to do battle with Thor, who is far stronger in the comics than he is in the MCU, and actually held his own against him until he was ultimately beaten. MCU Warlock, however, who seems more advanced combatively than Warlock in his first appearance in the comics, can be defeated by Nebula, of all people, by a shitty blade. Then he's just fine later, which isn't really explained why and what exactly his powers are. Either way, my whole point about Adam Warlock is that there are better ways to portray innocence and naivety without playing it up for comedy and portraying characters as bumbling idiots. And the MCU have already done it with the Vision. Also, I don't understand what that thing is on his forehead. Adam in the comics doesn't usually have gems on his head like that, like he's trying to make some kind of fashion statement. He has the Infinity Soul gem on his forehead in the comics, which the MCU counterpart of was destroyed. So I have no idea why they just put some random gem on his head, and it doesn't even do anything, and it's not even explained. It'd be like Harry Potter having his lightning mark on his forehead for no reason in the movies, and no one ever mentions it or ever brings it up. While in the books it's significant because Voldemort was the one who gave him the scar. This is post-Infinity Saga, where the Infinity Stones offered godlike powers to those who possessed them, and now they've been destroyed. You all still want to give this man a random, unexplained gem on his head with less of a fleshed-out reason than Lil Uzi Vert's. So if you haven't guessed, I wasn't fond of what James Gunn did with Warlock in this. He just shows up randomly in a movie. His presence wasn't truly felt. He's meant to have this Tony Stark-like, Steve Rogers-like, Nick Fury, Vision kind of presence, but he feels more like Kraglin in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. Hell, Avengers 1 Hawkeye feels more important. And this is why we missed out on Thanos versus Adam Warlock, guys. This is what we got instead. Anyway, moving on. I felt the humour in this was undercutting a lot of the emotional moments in the film. Marvel are notorious for this, and repetition isn't going to stop people from complaining about it. Stop it, Marvel. It completely takes me out when you do a super emotional, heart-wrenching scene, and then you have to make a stupid joke because you struggle to be serious for longer than 1 minute. It was especially jarring in this film because this movie is in fact the darkest in the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, and some of the MCU actually, and it's the most emotional. So the balance of comedy and darkness in emotional scenes was completely off at times. It also says a lot about the MCU that a CGI raccoon and a CGI otter probably have the most heartfelt, character-driven, emotional and human scenes in not only this movie, but the entirety of Phase 5 and Phase 4 of the MCU, and maybe even some of Phase 3 for crying out loud. I'd also like to give some light criticism to the dialogue. In the flashback scenes with Rocket and his animal friends, it was definitely heart-wrenching and touching, but them constantly telling us that they were really good friends. Friend, you're my friend. It feels so good to have a friend.
What about you, friend?
Rocket.
Rocket! It really is good to have friends.
Oh, friend! Friend! Fucking football friend! Jay, what are you doing? Oh, friend! Friend! I'm not your fucking friend, alright? Alright? Oh, friend! Friend!
So, are they friends or not?
It felt a little forced and slightly lazy. I think I know what Gunn was going for here with the childlike nature of the characters, but I felt some subtle dialogue would have done wonders here rather than telling us constantly that they're friends, like it's a scene description of what these characters are supposed to be feeling and emoting. Rocket leaving the High Evolutionary alive at the end didn't make much sense to me. The Guardians murdered dudes for a hell of a lot less, and he's here saying he didn't want to kill him because he's a Guardian. I didn't get that. And some of the dialogue again here was kind of a miss. Like Rocket saying to High Evolutionary, you don't want the world to be perfect. You just don't like the world the way it is.
It'll kill you. Only if I die? Yes. That's what killing you means.
I mean, am I dumb? Do I not get it? That line just seems dumb to me. I don't get it. Also, I get so tired of the childish dialogue and constant need to ramble on. Did you hit the red button? What does the red button do? I don't know what the red button's supposed to do. What about the blue button? The blue button's supposed to do this. But what about this? Why would you yell at me? I don't know why you yell at me. Stop yelling at me. It was so annoying. Like, Jesus Christ. It's like, they're not saying anything. They're just waffling. And it just irritated as all hell. I don't know why James Gunn feels the need to add shit like that in it, man. Like, just write normal dialogue. You don't need to be constantly trying to be funny. It's almost like I want to skip over that, fast forward those bits. It's the worst thing about Gunn's writing. I don't understand how people, or if people actually find this style of dialogue funny or engaging. Which leads me to some issues my fiance Carla had with some of the female characters. She told me that all the major female characters were constantly yelling at each other and were always ridiculously aggressive, and she didn't understand why they all had to be that way, including Mantis. Now, it could be argued that Gamora and Nebula were raised by Thanos, which makes them hyper-aggressive and loud, but Thanos wasn't even like that himself. He's methodical, he's calculating, he's usually calm. Even Mantis, who's supposed to be the nice one of the ladies, was over the top, loud and yelling and annoying. So I just thought it was interesting that she pointed that out to me, and I thought it was worth mentioning. I was disappointed that the High Evolutionary wasn't really much of a physical threat to the Guardians in the final battle. I was looking forward to see his combat abilities and how formidable he would be, but of course the Guardians made quick work of him. Missed opportunity there, I feel. Like I mentioned before in my Adam Warlock rant, I knew we were going to be seeing some new Guardians. And we were going to be seeing the Guardians we know disband. But we had little to no development for any of the new Guardians, which is not a very good foundation if they're planning to set up a new Guardians franchise for us to follow. Phil Vale, aka Quasar, and Adam Warlock are some of the most prominent and iconic figures in the Guardians of the Galaxy comics, and if you know the comics, you'd probably get excited by the name drops alone. But Adam was barely fleshed out in this movie, and Phil Vale was the blink and you miss it glorified cameo, it feels. I feel Gunn hasn't given us a reason to care about coming back to see these new characters in action, and I don't know if Rocket leading the Guardians is enough to bring people back, even though he used this movie to flesh out his backstory. I mean, Adam barely interacts with the Guardians, and I don't think he even says more than a couple of lines to them. I think the guy that played the High Evolutionary did a great job with what he had. He was a villain that you loved to hate. It was well acted. He didn't really have much of a fleshed out backstory though. You understood what he was doing, you understood his goals, but you didn't understand why. I suppose it's hinted at by his grotesque face at the end. He couldn't perfect himself, so he wanted to perfect the world, maybe? But that might just be me projecting my own ideas on the characters. And let's be real, Guardians of the Galaxy ain't trying to be as deep as that. Right, now that everyone that thinks I hate this movie is gone, that they've bounced, let's get right into what I loved about this movie and why I think it could be possibly the best Guardians movie, and is definitely the second best movie of Phase 5 and 4. The movie had a lot of heart. You can tell James Gunn loves these characters, and I may not agree with the way he depicts a lot of them from their source material counterparts, but regardless, you can tell he's telling a story and writing characters he believes in, and that's what you can really ask for from a writer, especially in these days when all writers want to do is get their political agenda out while using franchises and characters that they didn't create to be the mouthpiece of their personal worldview and to pander to journalists and current day trends while trying to check as many publicity boxes as possible. I truly loved how Gunn depicted Gamora and Peter's relationship in this, and Peter's unrequited love for her.
And maybe if you open yourself up to it, there's a possibility.
I don't think so, Quinn.
The cliche thing would have been for Peter to make Gamora fall in love with him all over again, make her understand why she's always loved him and that in every universe they are meant to be together. But no, this isn't the same Gamora, and sometimes in this life, the person who you believe to be your soulmate isn't always the one. I thought it was very grown up and very realistic. It was set up perfectly for Gamora to be the one to come in and save him when he was suffocating in space, just like he saved her in the first movie. And you know, everyone would have loved that, and I would have thought it was cute too. I was literally screaming that Gamora was coming to save Peter in a cinema, but then out of nowhere, Adam Warlock's dumbass hand comes touching Peter's like the Sistine Chapel painting, you know, because his name's Adam and supposed to be like this Christ-like figure. Anyway, when I saw Adam save Peter instead of Gamora, I thought that was a brilliant way to subvert expectations without betraying the characters' established arcs and personalities. That's how you do it, Rian Johnson. Yet still, Gamora's arc wasn't wasted. She learnt from Peter and the Guardians what it means to have true family and true love, and to care for someone by them going through hell and high water just to save Rocket, which made her see her new Ravagers more than just a means to an end, but actually a potential family. I did enjoy how Gunn depicted Adam Warlock's strength, though his durability and how he healed from Nebula's attack is questionable. It's a shame about his personality, but I suppose that can improve on future MCU appearances under different writers and directors who love the Jim Starlin brand of the character. I loved Rocket and the High Evolutionary backstory, how dark it was, how heartfelt it was, and how it really made you appreciate Rocket and who he was by the end of the film. It also helped to sell the High Evolutionary as a heel you love to hate. I mean, anyone torturing animals is going to be easy to hate, to be honest, so it was kind of an ingenious move from James Gunn, considering the lovable and precious way he depicted Rocket and his friends and their relationship. Another reason this movie was great was because it didn't feel the need to shove any political buzzwords or modern day jargon down your throats, like how a lot of movies and entertainment feels the need to do today. Gunn just told the story he wanted to tell, and let the characters' natural personalities lead the story, not whatever political thoughts he had on the day he was writing the script. And I think the only political thing that was said, it was said by the Hitler-esque villain of all people, about trying to create the perfect world without bigotry.
Earth would be a fabulous place were it not for the ignorance and bigotry.
Okay.
It inspired me to create Counter-Earth.
I don't care.
And Peter, the hero of all people, scoffed at the idea, or maybe High Evolutionary's hypocrisy, which I thought was hilarious, and I don't know if that was intentional or not. So in conclusion, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was a decent watch. It wasn't without its faults, but it did a lot more better than it did wrong. Its faults were kind of the faults that you'd see in the MCU Phase 1, 2 and 3. Pacing, some underdeveloped characters, and a more cookie-cutter story. Not the atrocious Phase 4 MCU issues like abysmal political MCU being a parody of itself and checked-boxed weak renditions of aimless, mindless, and heartless characters who have the exact same personality, the snarky badass female and the bumbling idiot male, who are more than likely self-inserts of the woke writers they hire without checking any credentials. Guardians 3 had heart, it was entertaining, and it was dark, and the characters for the most part had satisfying, completed arcs that made sense for all of them. Let's hope the MCU going forward learns from this win, and good luck to James Gunn in his DCU future. And James, please, don't make all your characters bumbling idiots in the DCU. Thanks for watching. Peace.